I'm Jane Dutton in Doha. The main stories on Al Jazeera. Iran has invited the presidents of Iraq and Syria to a summit in Tehran this weekend. The aim is to find a way forward in putting an end to the sectarian bloodletting in Iraq. The invitation came after the US accused Syria of failing to secure its borders to stop hundreds of foreign fighters crossing into Iraq. Our correspondent there, Hoda Abdel Hamid, reports.
A scene unimaginable only a few months ago. Two countries, deeply at odds for decades, now having to join hands. It's a necessity for Iraq, engulfed in a never-ending cycle of violence. Iraq and Washington accused Syria of allowing foreign fighters into Iraq, giving refuge to Saddam's supporters, and allowing them to use Syria as a base to support and finance armed groups. Accusations Syria has always refuted.
Syria is hurt by the Iraqi bloodshed, and it repeats its condemnation of all terrorist attacks that harm the Iraqi people and their institutions.
His visit comes as Iraq has seen the highest death toll in weeks. More than 100 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. Syria says seeing US troops leave Iraq would help curb the violence.
We believe that a timetable for pulling out foreign troops from Iraq will help reduce violence in Iraq and maintain security.
Not necessarily what Washington wants to hear, but the US insists Syria has an active role to play in Iraq.
I know that the government of Iraq is talking with Syria. Specifically, this is one of the things I know they're addressing with them, is what steps or measures the Syrian government may be able to take from its airport location, where they might come in through, to other activities they could do to help stem that flow of foreign fighters from coming into Iraq to begin with.
But there is a realization that involving old enemies like Syria and Iran is key to bring stability to Iraq. That seems to be the recommendation of the Iraq Study Group. Its report is due to come out in a few weeks. A last-ditch attempt to avoid the total collapse of Iraq. Hoda Abdel Hamid, Al Jazeera.
We spoke to Iraq's Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zebari. He said his government is not bowing to Western pressure.
No decision has been made yet about the summit you're talking about. And I heard your correspondent speaking that the visit by the Syrian foreign minister and these recent activities, as if it is a response to the Baker Study Group or what the British Prime Minister has said. This is in no way a response or a reaction to what you have been saying.
A relief operation is underway in Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia, where serious flooding is threatening a humanitarian crisis. At least 80 people have died and nearly 2 million people have been made homeless by the floods. Villages have been submerged and transport links washed away. An explosion on a passenger train in eastern India has killed at least 5 people and injured more than 70 others. The incident happened near Belakoba, 550 kilometers north of Kolkata. The explosion ripped through 2 passenger cars. The cause of the blast is not known. British Prime Minister Tony Blair is on a visit to Afghanistan. His first trip there in 5 years. Blair told British troops that there's no other choice but to keep fighting the Taliban.
And the alternative is that we go back to an Afghanistan that wasn't just misery for its people here, but ended up with violence and death being exported around the world. And that's not an alternative any of us should contemplate.
US President George Bush has held talks with his Indonesian counterpart, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Bogor, south of the capital, Jakarta. Ahead of Bush's arrival, 18,000 troops were deployed amid police reports that a suicide bomber was planning to infiltrate the protests. Bush said he looked forward to Indonesia being on the UN Security Council and said Jakarta was an important ally in what he calls his war on terrorism. We're back at the news at the top of the hour.
Hello and welcome. Iran wants to talk, it seems. The leadership in Tehran has invited Syria and Iraq to come and discuss ways to curb violence in the region, according to reports from there. Well, the reports go on to say that the Iraqi president, Jalal Talabani, has accepted the invitation and will head on to Iran on Saturday. Now, is this latest move due to pressure from the United States and its Western allies, or is Tehran showing its increasingly stronger position in an increasingly tense Middle East? Well, halfway across the world in Washington, D.C., pressure has been building on the administration of President George W. Bush to resolve what some see as a total disaster in Iraq, while the shadow of a nuclear Iran poses an added concern. How will any talks in Tehran affect the renewed interest in diplomacy with a country President Bush famously named as a member of the Axis of Evil? And don't forget, we'll take your questions on this show, and you can reach us by phone and emails during the show. If you want to call, use country code 1 for the USA, 202-741-0720. And if you're sending an email, the address is Riz, that's R-I-Z, at aljazeera.net. Joining us for the latest on Iran's position from Tehran, Dr. Kayhan Barzegar is the Assistant Professor of International Relations at the Science and Research Faculty of the Islamic Azad University. In London, Alex Bigham, an Iran analyst for the Foreign Policy Center. And here in Washington, D.C., veteran investigative journalist Robert Parry, who for the past 11 years has been editor of consortiumnews.com. Gentlemen, good to have you all here. And Dr. Kayhan Barzegar, I'm going to start with you there in Tehran. Get a feeling from you on what you make of the latest news from Tehran. It's willing to talk and has invited Syria and Iraq to come for those talks.
Well, thank you first. Hello to everyone. I think it was expected from the beginning that there should be a kind of assistance between outside power and regional countries. This is because of the fact that the regional politics is too complicated, and without any regional assistance, actually it's impossible to go through with the Middle East politics. Therefore, I believe that it is not like the past that the outside power could go everywhere, inflame war, and get out easily with the expected results. Therefore, I believe that there should be a necessity between the international community or great powers who are involved in the regional politics and regional countries in the region, that Iran has the best situation of helping and to be very constructive to go through with this.
Dr. Barzegar, let me just get from you the feel on the street there, in the streets of Tehran, the news that now Iran is willing to talk, is willing to bring these people in. What's being expected? What's expected to come out of these talks on the weekend?
Well, yes, I think that there had been a very good positive response here, that this could help to build Iraq a prosperous and more secured situation, because any insecurity and instability in Iraq would be in contradiction with the Iranian security. Therefore, when the situation is getting worse in Iraq, it's kind of concern for the Iranian as well. In my belief, it's a kind of the new effort to make between the two sides that can get Iraqi situation better. That would help the entire region. I'm
going to bring in Alex Bigham from London here, from the Foreign Policy Center. And Mr. Bigham, let me ask you about let's clarify, at least for our viewers, that we're talking about talks between countries that have largely been antagonistic until recently. So what would you expect to come out from the discussions?
Well, I think it's an extraordinary reversal, as you say. We're talking about a shift from the so-called axis of evil to potential partners for peace. So I think I'm optimistic about the potential, although it is such a great shift. Clearly, the lessons, as Mr. Barzegar suggested, are that you have to get the region involved in order to develop a lasting settlement. And the lesson from for instance, nation building in the Balkans is that it's only when you get regional neighbours involved that you do get that lasting settlement. So I do think this is a step in the right direction.
Robert Parry, to what extent do you think that Iran is acting under pressure now from the US? Has there been pressure for a diplomatic path and Iran is now responding?
Well, there certainly has been pressure from the United States, because there's sort of a clock that's ticking right now. You have 2 more years of the Bush administration. In many ways, the White House has made clear that they will not tolerate the development of a nuclear bomb in Iran. They have said this is not something that would be acceptable. Of course, in Israel, the Prime Minister Omer has come forward and called it an existential threat to Israel. So there's real pressure on President Bush to see if he can get some kind of resolution of this issue. And that in turn has put pressure on Iran. But the Iranians might also be thinking in terms of how can they continue to sort of deal with the United States for the next 2 years while the president's term runs